Okay, so this will be kind of a cursory introduction to Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex that we'll be reading for the study committee for the month of March. This is the book we'll be using. The translation I'm using is the newest one by Constance Board and Sheila Malavani Chevalier. So yeah, that's kind of what this will be about. I highly recommend How to Read Beauvoir if you're interested in going through this. It's kind of a good introduction to the key topics. So I'll give a brief history of Beauvoir, and then I'll develop the ideas that she kind of presupposes throughout this text. Basically, existentialism, familiarity with Hegel, and a few basic ideas of the 20th century philosopher Martin Heidegger. And then I'll move into the key notions of the second sex as developed in the introduction, which are the concept of woman, situation, and other. And then from there, I'll want to break into smaller discussion groups and just kind of talk about the ideas, generate some buzz, and hopefully encourage everyone to come out for the study committee. And since we've kind of ran late, I'll try to get this done in about half an hour, 40 minutes. So Beauvoir was born in 1908 in Paris to a middle-class family. She received her bachelor's equivalent in Latin, Greek, and literature in 1925. From 1928 to 1929, Beauvoir studied at the Sorbonne and the École Normale Supérieure, where she met her friend and lifelong partner, Jean-Paul Sartre. In 1943, she published her first novel. It's worth noting that her and Sartre, both in 1941, tried to ally themselves with the resistance movement and were excluded for sort of controversial reasons. But they did try to enter the resistance movement. In 1947, Beauvoir took a trip through America and published The Ethics of Ambiguity, her first major philosophical work. In 1948, she published America Day by Day, which chronicled her experience in late 1940s America and paid specific attention to segregation and racism in the South, as well as the roles and concepts of women as seen by the American public. It's a fantastic book. I'd highly recommend it. In 1949, she published The Second Sex, which we're reading, which is widely recognized as one of the greatest one of the greatest books of the 20th century. Surely one of the greatest, if not the greatest, work of feminism of all time. And from 1958 to 1972, Beauvoir wrote her 4-volume autobiography. And then on the 14th of April, 1986, she died in Paris. It's a pretty bare bones history, but I'm not our advisor. No names be mentioned. So we'll move on to the ideas of existentialism. So Jean-Paul Sartre wrote in 1945, I want to say, Being in Nothingness, which is kind of a foundational text for what came to be called existentialism in French society. This philosophical theory emphasizes the notion of freedom as an ontological foundation of human being. I want to just say, first of all, this is going to be more like a teaching seminar. So if you have any questions throughout, feel free to disrupt me. This isn't like a lecture. If you want to ask what I mean by ontology, or you're interested in a specific notion, just raise your hand, let me know, and we'll go through it as we develop the key notions.
Hey, Steve, what do you mean by ontology?
Thanks, Josh. Ontology comes from the Greek word ontos, for being. I won't even worry about it. Comes from ontos, which is being, and ology, which is the study. So it's the study of being. It basically asks what there is prior to particularly how we come to know it, which is epistemology. So it's kind of the foundation of what there is in the world. What are we looking for? What are the principles that generate things? What is a thing? What is a person? Etc. But so existentialists posit freedom as a fundamental ontological component of human being. Human beings are ontologically, essentially free. And this manifests itself in an identity relationship, which has 3 components. It has the in itself, the in itself, the for itself. These are very Hegelian notions. Hegel was a 19th century German philosopher. And being for others. I do want to preface this with, you're getting my version of existentialism, which will be controversial in scholarship, but who cares? Because my version's more interesting and more communist than the scholarship will entail. But so normally being for others isn't included. They normally look at the dichotomy of for itself and in itself in the scholarship, and I'm including being for others, which is a topic or category that Sartre develops in Being and Nothingness, which I think is very essential to de Beauvoir's critical notion of the situation, which we'll look at further. But so, the in itself, or being in itself, all of these you could put being in front of. So you got being in itself, being for itself, and being for others. But the in itself is the object, its immanence, and I'm going to misspell on the board. And its facticity. I'll explain that in just a sec. The for itself is the subject. It's no thing, which I'll explain, because it's not, a lot of times it's just written simply as nothing, and Sartre often will call it nothingness. But the point being is that it's no thing in particular. It's a very specific notion. It's not just like non-being or this indiscrete, like non-existence, or I don't know. There's a very specific notion. And transcendence. So here you have the immanence, which is the world of things, which is our facticity. And facticity is an existentialist concept which denotes the facts that are true about you. I am so high. I weigh so much. I was born at a certain time into a certain social context. These are sort of the facts that are true about me. That there's also a notion of thrownness in existentialism, that I was thrown into them. I didn't have any choice about my family, the color of my skin, the height of my body, a lot of my key features, my genetics, my eyesight. These things are my facticity. They're simply given, and I'm simply thrown into them. It goes along with the objects. We're very thing-like in that regard. In the same way that I'm here and I exist and I endure and persist through time, so does tables, chairs, desks, etc. Transcendence goes along with subjectivity, and that's my ability to transcend or go above the facts that are true about me. So I may be 24 years old, and I, could possibly take a stance on my age and decide that despite blowing all my chances and despite the total implausibility, I could choose to be an NBA basketball player. And I could start working really hard, and I could try to commit myself to getting on some college team and becoming a basketball player. And that would be me attempting to transcend the facts of my life. Not being able to jump very well, being kind of uncoordinated, being slow, not being a very good basketball player. It's a poor choice. But it's the sense that I can take a stance on my facts. You can take a stance on your birth date even. The way that I'm 24, I could play it down and say that I'm however old. And I could say, or perhaps I could say older if I wanted to impress someone. But I'm able to take the facts of my life and interpret them or transcend them and use them in a specific way that goes above them. And I've used really trivial examples, but we'll get to more interesting stuff with de Beauvoir. And the no-thingness of the for itself is a controversial issue in Sartre, but in de Beauvoir I think it's a lot more coherent. And it'll have to do with the way that, remember these three categories, and I haven't really fleshed this out yet, are an identity. They construct human identity. But the no-thingness is the sense that, I need to earn a raise. I'm going to erase these as long as anyone has any questions before I kind of move on. Because I like to draw a diagram. I'm a diagrammer. It has its drawbacks, and I'll explain what those are. But I also think it helps illustrate a crucial point.
Can you briefly explain what you meant by immanence?
Immanence is terrestrial. It's the material state of affairs. It's the facticity. It's the concrete circumstances.
So what's the difference between facticity and immanence? There's not much?
There's not. There's no difference between immanence and facticity. The distinction will be between immanence and transcendence, which Facticity is the existential term used to sort of describe all of those factors which I'm thrown into, that are just true about me, that I can take a stance on, but are just true about me. Okay, so this will denote childhood, this horizontal line, it actually won't have an arrow, it'll have a point, which is death. This is just the general trajectory of human life. In existentialism, or in Heidegger at least, there's a concept of being towards death. Part of what makes human beings unique is the sense that we're aware of our own mortality. We know that we're going to die. It plays a dynamic function in our lives. The way we make choices, the immediacy of those choices, the immediacy of our relationships to one another, those all take on a special context and notion when put in terms of death. But so, along this line, you have the general trajectory of human life. And then here, this will be the axis of immanence, and you'll have the future, the transcendence. You have your past and your future. You have old relationships and future relationships. Okay, so the point of the diagram is here you have in itself. Here you have the for itself. And here you have being for others. Now, being for others is your social stance, and it entails your relationships with other people. The way we are for each other in the RSU, the way we are in this classroom, is different than the way that we are on the street, doing service projects, doing rallies, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's just the dynamic identity we have with each other. The relationships that we have intimately with our partners, that we have with our family members, that we have with our closest friends, those will take on different roles as well. Same as the relationships we have with colleagues, we have with our co-workers, the way that we interact with people we don't like but have to see on a regular basis, the way we interact with our roommates. These are a myriad of social relationships that constitute being for others, the way we are for other people, the way we are perceived, the way we even present ourselves. So along this axis, you got those relationships, and then the for itself and the in itself, which we've kind of talked about. And human identity is basically this interplay of points in between a transitory system of human being. Transitory in the sense that the downside of this diagram is it presents human being as sort of static. It's like you got these three lines, and there they cross, and that's human being. We got to keep in mind that these are continually progressing. The relationships, your past relationships, are moving forward. The past is continually being reinterpreted, and you're projecting yourself through new projects, new goals and desires into the future, and you're continually growing closer to death. So this is by no means static, but human identity takes on a new component. Because for the existentialist, sort of the catchphrase, which I didn't want to start with, I wanted to kind of get into the more theoretical before I went back to it, so we could approach it a little more responsibly, is existence precedes essence. So whereas human beings, think of the way that we construct something. This marker, this table, a computer. We construct things first with the idea, right? No one would buy a car that a bunch of people got together and just made on the spot, threw together, and then said, yeah, go drive this on the highway, like, good luck. We rigorously design the car to safety standards. We rigorously design the pen to meet specific functions. And there's a concept of these things, of car, of computer, of pen, of table, before the thing actually exists. There's a concept which we take matter and we kind of apply the concept to make the pen. The pen's just not out there in the world, and the pen's not dynamically creating itself. Its essence exists before its actual existence. Its essence is sort of its potential for existence. Does that make sense? Whereas with human beings, Simone de Beauvoir and Sartre want to say existence precedes essence. in the sense that human beings have no given special intrinsic identity. Because identity is this dynamic play of forces. It's who you are to other people, it's who you are to yourself and your projects and your commitments, and it's sort of your trajectory towards death. And the way that these all factor in is who you are at any given moment. And to try to pigeonhole a human being, and this will become really important in the context of the way society has tried to pigeonhole the identity of women. But to try to pigeonhole for our purposes now, a human being in general, is a movement of what they will call, the existentialists, mauvaise foi, or bad faith. And bad faith is the idea that human beings are only one of these dynamic forces. Bad faith is the idea that, well, I'm 24, I've already blown my shot at the NBA, I can't jump, I'm blah, 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 and I identify wholly with my facticity. I can't be part of, this resistance movement, I can't support, this revolutionary group, I don't have the money, I don't have the time, blah, 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 and I wholly identify with the facts of my situation, with the specific context that I'm in. I identify with my in itself, not necessarily just my biological trajectory, keep in mind, but my facticity. And so I reduce myself to my facticity and I say, I just can't do it, just because of the things we've said. That's a form of bad faith. Also, to wholly identify with my for itself would be a movement of bad faith. To identify just with this, particular project that I have, that I've cast into the future. If I start walking around like I'm an NBA superstar tomorrow, start treating people like crap and throwing money around, which is a terrible cliche, I realize, but if that is the case, and that is how I choose to conduct myself, I'm also living in bad faith, because I'm wholly disavowing all of my in itself, because I'm not actually an NBA player, or I'm actually not PhD in my example. I want to go on for my PhD. To act as if I have my PhD, or as if I'm, someone I'm not, is to live in bad faith. It's to deny certain aspects which are true of me. It's to take only a certain side as who I am, when in fact I'm a dynamic play of forces. On my past, on my future projects, and I'm very much who I am for others. Which brings into question, for women as we'll see, the way society treats them is in fact an aspect of how they are. In America Day by Day, Simone de Beauvoir talks about the way that Southerners believe they know black people, and they know how they are, and who they are, and believe that they're not doing anything wrong. There's nothing wrong with slavery and segregation. They're treating them as they deserve to be treated, and they know them, and it's just how things are. It's sort of a naturalization of that context. The same way that the Nazis or anti-Semites, to use less controversial terms, the way the anti-Semites sort of pigeonhole Jews and create this Jewish natural identity, which is, sort of cosmopolitan, elitist, etc. But in going back to America Day by Day, de Beauvoir says that actually plays a dynamic role in black people's lives in the South. They are, in fact, a part of the way they are treated. Their being for others is, in fact, a part, not the most important, or perhaps not the constitutive component, but it is a part of their identity. In the same way, the way that the media and our particular context in America, or using a larger domain or a larger scope, first world, or perhaps a global conception of women, the way that we try to pigeonhole women, or say that they're this, or treat them like this, or misrepresent them, is in fact how they are for others. And it is in fact part of their identity, which I mean is very problematic. Right? We want to say, well, no, it's not. They're just being mistreated. Well, sure, they're being mistreated. De Beauvoir's point is that that's actually part of their identity. We can't just disavow those things, we have to account for them. And that'll be part of her project here. But anyway, I think I've kind of driven this home. Bad faith, the tendency to over-identify with a specific component of the dynamic forces of human identity. There's a lot of words there, let me cut it down. Bad faith. Over-identifying with a single aspect of who you are. Any questions on that before we...
I was wondering if there's any particular reason you started with childhood instead of birth.
Yeah, just, I mean, we could put that.
I wasn't sure if there was like a...
No, that was just me thinking
Gotcha.
childhood, but no, in fact, birth, I mean, there's a lot of good studies that show you're already predisposed to a language in the womb. You come out more receptive to the language your parents have been speaking and the language you've been hearing in your social context, so that's actually a really good point. You actually already are in the process of socialization at birth, so
Even pre-birth.
even pre-birth, yeah, exactly.
Wayne had something.
Yeah, how is this different from like the collective consciousness of like the whole New Age movement? Because take the Nazis and the Jews for example. The Jews outnumbered the Nazis like, it was crazy. But the collective consciousness of the Jews that they were all like buying into their own hype, kind of like black people believing, you know, rappers, NBA stars and all that. That's why, you know, 6 million or however many were allowed to be killed. Like they allowed themselves to be killed because they started buying into that own hype. Because the like general consensus of the entire group was that they were shitty and they belonged in those camps.
Well, first of all, I would disagree with that, that summary of what happened.
Well, no, I mean, how is this different from that?
How is it? Well, here's the thing. I disagree with your example of the Jews. I think that the Jews did not think that they were an inferior human race or an inferior group of people. I think that they were violently subjected to one of the worst acts of genocide we've seen in the history of the human race.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like, they essentially, like, by buying into the bad faith of, you know, the whole collective consciousness, allowed themselves to be killed because it was a step-by-step process. See what I'm saying?
Well, sure, but I mean, I think that that's a misreading of history, is what I'm saying. I don't think they bought into a collective consciousness in bad faith. I think that they were subjected to a specific set of historical circumstances. And many of them took a stance against it and joined resistance movements and were still killed. And I mean, sure, there was a group that thought, oh, this won't ever affect me, and I can just sort of be passive and it'll all go by. And it didn't work out like that. But I don't think that that's a... The collective unconscious is different from existentialism, and that existentialism doesn't want to posit any unconscious or subconscious. They are simply positing freedom as an ontological category of human being, and that we are ontologically free, meaning we can take a stance on any situation through consciousness. Even if you have a gun to my head and say, give me your wallet, my choice, I now, under existentialism, have a choice to give you my wallet. And the Jew has a choice to get on a train. And that's problematic. I mean, and this is where I think Beauvoir's analysis of the situation, oh, I erased it, but which we'll get to in the text. But de Beauvoir's analysis of the situation will be an improvement over Sartre. Because Sartre just wants to say, so what? They're still ontologically free. They still have absolute freedom. Whereas de Beauvoir says, actually, it's a really restricted sense of freedom. And what's the value of that freedom? If there's a gun to my head and you're saying, give me the wallet, like, it's a very, very restricted sense.
Right.
And it doesn't mean a whole lot to say I'm absolutely free in the situation. So the situation will play a big role. But I don't think, existentialism, first of all, wants to say you're responsible for the choices you make, and you're responsible for maintaining a sort of holistic identity. Not over-identifying with any specific component, but realizing that you are a dynamic play of forces. You are your actions, most importantly. Because existence precedes essence. If you just say, like, you know, I'm going to be the greatest anthropologist of all time, and then do nothing along that track, I mean, you know, you have to actually act. Continue.
So this is more like along the lines of the whole like law of attraction type of thing you're saying. Like thoughts become things.
Sure. I mean,
Insofar as they're acted upon, it's not just like you put it out. Well,
Right.
It's not like The Secret where you just put it out there
Right.
into the
You have
universe
to-
and it
you
comes
have to
back.
put
right.
Effort into it.
Yeah, the domain of human identity is in the world, is in actions. To say that you're, this nice, special human being, but then in your actions you treat everyone like crap is just wrong for an existentialist. So they're very much more oriented towards responsibility and action than a sort of collective experience of identity. We are individuals, and existentialism will place the importance on individuality, not universalism. So, does that help?
Answers my question.
Okay, awesome. Well, yeah, so, moving on. I guess I don't need the board anymore. So, you guys have endured all of my writing, and now we're done. But,
I have one more question.
yeah, Brian.
So for the being for others section, like you said, it had to do with like your like social status and like how people perceive you, kind of like a looking in the glass mirror kind of aspect. But on the arrows, you put old relations and future relations. Is that like in the sense of like before the civil rights movement, blacks were treated one way, and then after, like the relations with the people were different, or is that like my relation to you is like affecting me?
I mean,
why do you use like the old relations and future relations?
well, because that's a great question. Everything in the diagram is still in play, because the way that you look at your past and the way you interpret your past and who you sort of piece together, like who I am through my past actions and my past relationships is going to be important, and those never just simply go away. They're always sort of on cue. They're available for interpretation, and they kind of help they are part of your facticity. They are part of who you are and what you've done. So I put old relationships and future relationships with being for others in terms of those relationships will always determine parts of your identity, and they're always constitutive of your identity. But all I simply meant was the old relationships are very similar to the past in sense of being for others. And that it's all in play. Your birth, your social context, thinking back on your history, maybe perhaps being critical of your history and taking examples from childhood. I mean, we all have very traumatic experiences in childhood that help form us. The way we try to use those in our lives today and the way we have those determine our projects in the future are all sort of a dynamic whole, which is our identity. It's not any one part in particular. For the existentialist. This is not a view I would advocate, for the record. I am not an existentialist. But does that help?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is kind of the background she's supposing in terms of existentialism. We'll get to the Hegel actually in the text, and the Heidegger as well, but I just want to get those names loaded so that you guys are paying attention. I'll try to hurry and finish this out in about 5-10 minutes. So how do I want to start this? On the third page of the introduction, it's actually just the first page of the introduction, de Beauvoir begins by asking, what is woman? Where are the women? Asked a short-lived magazine recently. But first, what is a woman? Tota milier in utero. She is a womb, some say. Yet speaking of certain women, the experts proclaim, they are not women, even though they have a uterus like others. Everyone agrees there are females in the human species. Today, as in the past, they make up about half of humanity, and yet we are told that femininity is in jeopardy. We are urged, be woman, stay woman, become woman. So not every female human being is necessarily a woman. Some must take part in this mysterious and engendered reality known as femininity. So right there, and I'm going to continue with this topic, but she's calling into question the standard notions of femininity, and how in the mass media, for our purposes, in just sort of the public consciousness, not collective unconsciousness, but in like the public consciousness, what's being thought about women, how they're being conceptualized, how they're being thought of, and what roles are acceptable for them, seem contradictory. She's saying, at the same time that people are saying, be a woman, become a woman, some are saying, well, just because you have a uterus doesn't make you a woman. So she's putting her finger on this contradiction in just the social norms of her day. Again, recall this is written in 1949, but I think that's just as relevant today. So not every female human being is necessarily a woman. She must take part in this mysterious and endangered reality known as femininity. Is femininity secreted by the ovaries? Is it enshrined in a platonic heaven? Is a frilly petticoat enough to bring it down to earth? In St. Thomas' time, it was an essence defined with as much certainty as was the sedative quality of the poppy. But conceptualism has lost ground. Biological and social sciences no longer believe that there are immutable determinate entities that define given characteristics like those of woman or Jew or the black. Science considers characteristics as secondary reactions to a situation. If there is no such thing today as femininity, it is because there never was. Does the word woman then have no content? So here she's calling into question the naturalization, as we've already talked about. The way images are represented as natural, as determinate, as unchangeable. The situation is the environmental characteristics, and she's playing a lot on Claude Lévi-Strauss and the importance of environmental determinacy as opposed to genetic determinacy. But the situation is just going to be that social context that you're a part of, and just keep that in mind because it'll be prevalent throughout. To reject the notions of the eternal feminine, the black soul, or the Jewish character is not to deny that there are today Jews, blacks, or women. This denial is a liberation for those concerned, is not a liberation for those concerned, but an inauthentic flight. Clearly no woman can claim without bad faith to be situated beyond her sex. So what de Beauvoir is saying here is that we can't deny that there are blacks and Jews and women. That's not the case. Those do exist. They are beings in themselves. They are discrete entities in the world. However, to claim that there's this inner essence, the eternal feminine, the eternal black, the eternal Jew, these sort of essential immaterial notions, that's what she's rejecting. Okay, so, and of course, I know I'm kind of just grinding things in here, but the distinction she wants to draw is reject naturalization, endorse socialization. And then the question becomes, under what social conditions has woman been constructed? Under what social conditions has woman been portrayed as such, as the servant of man? Okay, so that was the concept of woman that I wanted to get out, is the contradictory notions, which she'll develop more in the section of mythology, and the way that contradictory myths are constructed around women. But what she does, first of all, is draw attention to how this has been associated with gender and biology. And she wants to endorse the distinction between female as gender, or feminine as a social construction, and female as a biological category. Any questions on that? Kind of just shooting through a lot here to get through it. We're good? Okay. And so the next and last topic I wanted to talk about was otherness, which will be a key theme. And that begins on page 6 in the introduction, where she begins, "A man's body has meaning by itself, disregarding the body of the woman, whereas the woman's body seems devoid of meaning without reference to the male. Man thinks himself without woman. Woman does not think herself without man. And she is nothing other than what man decides. She is thus called the sex, meaning that the male sees her essentially as a sexed being. For him, she is sex. So she is it in the absolute. So the identification she's making is, in society, especially the French context she's writing in, men see women as sex, as sexual objects. She is determinate and differentiated in relation to man, while he is not in relation to her. She is the inessential in front of the essential. He is the subject. He is the absolute, and she is the other. The category of other is as original as consciousness itself. Alterity is the fundamental category of human thought. No group ever defines itself as one, as a collective group, without immediately setting up the other opposite of itself. These phenomena could not be understood if human relations were solely a Mitsein, which means being with, it's a Heideggerian term. These phenomena could not be understood if human reality were solely a Mitsein based on solidarity and friendship. On the contrary, They become clear if, following Hegel, a fundamental hostility to any other consciousness is found in consciousness itself. The subject posits itself only in opposition. It asserts itself as the essential, set up as an inessential object. And I have one more paragraph, and then we'll close it out and go into discussions. But the idea there being, consciousness, our human subjectivity, only identifies itself in contrast with another human subjectivity. I come up against Josh, and we realize that one another exists. We realize that he seems to have a similar sort of phenomena, conscious phenomena going on back here like I do. And then we have what Hegel calls a struggle for recognition in the phenomenology of spirit. He wants to assert his for itself, his transcendence, his ability to go beyond his facts. Him, instead of just being a single body, he wants me to recognize him as the absolute subjectivity. And we have a struggle for recognition. And for Hegel, this struggle, if it comes towards a near-death encounter, in fear of death, I lose the struggle for recognition, and I choose to just assume the role of other, of what in Hegel's terms is the master-slave dialectic, or the lord-bondage opposition. And so Josh becomes lord, I become bondman or slave, serf, servant to him through his assertion of his own importance and subjectivity. And de Beauvoir, supporting Hegel, wants to say this is generally true of human interaction in general. This is sort of the abstract narrative that human beings have when confronting each other and attempting to establish social relationships. Sartre says something very similar in Being and Nothingness, in that almost every interaction we have, friends, family, etc., is this sort of antagonism. But Sartre wants to reject the idea that we can live in sort of a reciprocal identification or in harmony as mutual subjects. Beauvoir, however, does not. Beauvoir wants to say, following Hegel, and I think it's a much better reading of Hegel for whatever it's worth, that we can live in reciprocity, in forgiveness and love and all those things we want to talk about. Those can become viable options through a mutual recognition of subjectivity. And throughout the second sex, what's really at stake in my reading of the text is women's ability to arise on an equal footing with man, to realize herself in her transcendence as a subject, instead of the continually objectified role that society in general has given her. That's what I think will be sort of the driving force of this book, is the struggle for equal footing in terms of realizing their own freedom. And then to close it out, de Beauvoir finishes the introduction. Woman's drama lies in the conflict between the fundamental claim of every subject, which always posits itself as essential, and the demands of a situation that constitute her as inessential. How in the feminine condition can a human being accomplish herself? What paths are open to her? Which ones lead to dead ends? How can she find independence within dependence? What circumstances limit woman's freedom, and can she overcome them? These are the fundamental questions we would like to elucidate. This means that focusing on the individual's possibilities, we will define these possibilities not in terms of happiness, but in terms of freedom. So again, happiness isn't the issue here. We're not looking for happiness. Existentialism isn't really interested in happiness. Happiness isn't the highest human good. We're looking at freedom. And how can individuals, in particular in this text women, actualize freedom, their ontological capacity, to its fullest? Clearly this problem would have no meaning if we thought that a physiological, psychological, or economic destiny weighed on women. So we will begin by discussing woman from a biological, psychoanalytic, and historical materialist point of view. We will then attempt to positively demonstrate how feminine reality has been constituted, why woman has been defined as the other, and what the consequences have been from men's point of view. Then we will describe the world from the woman's point of view, such as it is offered to her. And we will see the difficulties women are up against just when, trying to escape the sphere they have been assigned until now, they seek to be a part of the human Mitsein. And again, Mitsein, it's German, it means mit means with, that Sein means being. So Heidegger posits a fundamental Mitsein, a being with. There's no human being in a vacuum. There's no human being in isolation. Human beings are social creatures, and they're already born into a world that's defined as them with others. So the context she's looking for is how women can be successfully integrated into a free and open network of Mitsein that allows women the same actualizing of her freedom as anyone else. So that's kind of my overview. Do we have any clarification questions or kind of ancillary questions before we get into discussion groups?
So is she going against the antagonistic theory of people, or?
No, she's endorsing the idea that it's our fundamental encounter and sort of the history of human encounters. That somewhere along the line, and she'll trace this out really interestingly and really well in her part on mythology, but man has somehow used woman to mediate his own image, to create himself, while neglecting her. And casting her in a specific light as object, sort of as mirror, as utility for man, that doesn't allow woman to actualize her own freedom as an equal being. So there is a fundamental antagonism in the relationship, but she wants to say, unlike Sartre, that Sartre wants to say there's always an antagonism. Beauvoir wants to say we can overcome that antagonism. And that's part of what her analysis is aimed at. Anything else? Okay, so we want to just break up into like 3 groups and discuss for 5 minutes and then do closing questions and sing the internationality? Cool. All right, I think I'll just count people off 1, 2, 3 so that we're not all just with our friends, if that's okay. 1, 2, 3. 1,
I actually have to leave.
2, 3.